Thanks so much, Nicholas. And I want to start by thanking Alan Madden for his welcome to country. Alan always does such a wonderful job. He brings real dignity and authority to his welcome, and you get a little bit of comedy thrown in for free. So thank you also, Elaine, for your opening remarks. I thought your analogy about the Olympics challenging us to do a little bit better and a little bit better. I think that's a wonderful analogy because, you know, the reason I'm here today is I want to talk to your association about the role you play in conservation. And of course, I'm so proud of Australia's zoos and aquariums. You only need to, I mean, you probably shouldn't do this, but visit a zoo or an aquarium overseas and see how much better ours are, to know that we really have some of the, you know, the best facilities in the world, the most ethical, and it, you know, it is quite a stark contrast sometimes, but it doesn't mean that we can't continue to improve, as you've pointed out. So thank you for pointing that out. And of course, in acknowledging Alan's welcome, I would pay my respects to Gadigal elders past and present, any other First Nations people we might have with us here today. For thousands of years, Gadigal people in this location have cared for the diverse plant and animal life we have in the centre, the heart of our city, and also in our beautiful harbour. I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about the conservation work that so many of you are engaged with, because I've been able to visit many of your facilities over the past couple of years since I've had the environment portfolio, to see and to support the work that you're doing. Zoos help connect people with nature. I think that's what Nick is saying when he's talking about humanimals. And they help people learn about the environment, about animals and plants and how they fit into our landscapes. And I think that understanding is the first step to a commitment to protect what's valuable. So zoos play a really important role in encouraging ordinary people to feel invested in nature, and they play a really important role in research and captive breeding programs. That work's going on right across our continent, whether it's Taronga Zoo, where you were last night, giving bilbies the best chance of recovery, or New Haven Wildlife Sanctuary and Alice Springs Desert Park, helping to protect the Marla or Perth Zoo, helping to ensure the welfare of translocated western ground parrots, or Cairns Aquarium, protecting the World Heritage values of the Great Barrier Reef. You are, all of you, truly leading the way for wildlife and people. And I want to talk to you today to assure you that you're not on your own, that you've got a government that's on your side. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the reforms that we're engaged in and the investments that we're making. I think before that, we need to acknowledge that Australian wildlife are doing it tough. Our natural environment has been under enormous pressure for many decades, and for too long we've seen biodiversity loss go unchecked in this country. We know that there are significant threats to plants and animals and ecosystems, from climate change, from more frequent and intense bushfires, from the devastating floods we've experienced and prolonged drought, and of course the impact that development has had on habitat destruction. Our environment has been left in a very poor shape, and many of our native plants and animals are at risk of extinction. Numbats, Gordian finch, mountain pygmy possum, we've got about 2,000 plants and animals on our threatened species list. Australia can't continue to wear the badge of mammal extinction capital of the world. We recognise, the government recognises the urgency of this problem, and we've taken on the challenge of improving it. Halting biodiversity loss, protecting and conserving 30% of land and 30% of water by 2030, stopping the decline of nature, committing to zero new extinctions, starting the process of repairing and restoring what's been damaged, making sure that we leave Australia in a better state than what it is now. Together, those elements constitute our nature positive plan. They're the building blocks of our nature positive plan. That plan is designed to better protect our unique wildlife and plants, and to make sure that our species have the very best chance of surviving and thriving. It starts with environmental law reform. Reforms that will make our regulatory system fit for purpose, and we've already passed the first stage of our nature positive laws. That first stage means that drinking water will be better protected from mining projects, coal mining and coal seam gas and other gas mining projects. And it also means that we'll be able to establish a world-first nature repair market that will encourage investment in biodiversity repair and protection. We've now got stage 2 of our laws in the Parliament. Stage 2 will establish Australia's first ever national Environment Protection Agency, an agency that has real teeth, that has stronger powers to better protect nature, and much, much higher penalties for people or organisations that don't abide by our laws. Stage 2 will also deliver Environment Information Australia, a new independent body that will provide better, publicly searchable, publicly available data and information. We're backing those changes with real funding. In the last budget alone, we put an extra $307 million into those improvements in laws and institutions that are designed to drive a nature positive Australia. So we've identified the problems, and we've started on the changes that we need to make to fix them. The work is really urgent. We need to be ambitious. We are supporting the law reform agenda with ambitious national biodiversity targets that are backed with actions to make them achievable. The Threatened Species Action Plan is a key to that. It's an ambitious plan to stop further extinctions in Australia, to prevent any more extinctions of plants or animals in this country. I know there are a number of people in this room who were involved in the development of the plan, in particular in identifying the priority species in the plan. Obviously, choosing priority species doesn't mean we don't care about the other species. It means that there are species that are anchor species. If we protect these, we're protecting their environment. We're protecting all of the plants and animals that are in their ecosystem. The zero new extinctions target will contribute to the targets that we've signed up to with the Global Biodiversity Framework, and I know you'll be hearing more about that later. That UN Convention on Biological Diversity is guiding the commitments that we're making and the work that we're doing with states and territories, and includes other key commitments, as I mentioned, protecting 30% of our land and 30% of our marine areas by 2030. Also, our target to repair those key damaged areas as well. So our task of saving species is enormous, and government can't do it on its own, not the federal government, not the states and territories. No organisation can do it on its own, because we really do need all hands on deck. I wanted to come and talk to you today because I do really see your organisations as key partners in this fight, whether it's through research, whether it's through your involvement in captive breeding programs and safekeeping those species, or contributing your expertise to recovery actions in wild habitats. Many ZAA accredited facilities are really doing a fantastic job with native species breeding programs to help save some of our most at-risk species. And many of you are also engaged in international efforts to protect species as well. I'm very pleased when our government is able to support the work that you're doing. For example, the work that Taronga Zoo and Zoos Victoria are doing to breed the critically endangered southern corroboree frog in purpose-built facilities. The government recently invested $480,000 to increase the production of frog eggs and juveniles through that Saving Native Species program. Those young frogs are being reintroduced into their only wild habitat in Kosciuszko National Park, boosting the species' chances of survival in the wild. We're backing Zoos Victoria to install 400 nest boxes for Leadbetter's possum in the species core range across the Victorian Central Highlands. The boxes will provide dens for about 525 possums. That's a $360,000 investment from the Saving Native Species program. We've put $224 million aside for projects like this. So you see what can be relatively small amounts of funding in the kind of overall amount that government spend on the environment can make a really critical difference to species' chance of survival in the wild in particular. I didn't ever imagine when I was growing up that we'd live in a time when koalas were endangered on the east coast of Australia, but they are, as all of you know. We've got a $76 million program that we're investing to make sure that our kids and grandkids will be able to see koalas in the wild. It includes funding for projects like $3.5 million for the Australia Zoo Wildlife Hospital, $2.4 million for Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary. Those two ZAA members are both doing really critical work to making sure that koalas are cared for and rehabilitated if they're brought in injured. That's just like a tiny snapshot of the sort of projects that your members are engaged in and that we're very proud to be able to support. Now, one of the key risks that we're facing, and I'm sure that you'll be all talking about this over the next few days, is avian flu. The high pathogenicity avian influenza is something that we are taking very, very seriously as a government, and we are doing our very best to prepare for. We are obviously very, very worried that the H5 variant is coming for us, and that really is going to need an all-in approach from your member organisations, public organisations, governments, private organisations like yours working together. We've already been working with state and territory officials, and I think there's a lot of people in this room who've also been engaged in this work. I am very worried about the extinction risks of birds that are in captive breeding programs at the moment. You've got numbers that are already critically low in the wild and very limited capacity to deal with an introduction of this, particularly this new variant of avian flu. We're also worried not just about those species that are already identified as at risk, but when you see some of the mass mortality events that we've seen overseas, you can have species that aren't currently identified as being at risk, quite quickly, really face quite sort of existential threats. We've seen avian flu obviously not just affecting birds but affecting mammals. We've seen seals and sea lions at particular risk as well. We've got the spring migration from the Northern Hemisphere in coming months, and I think all of you would acknowledge that this is a particularly dangerous time. So I know that many of you here are already engaged in assessing these risks and preparing for these risks, particularly with the new strain of avian flu. I know that many of you are already working with Commonwealth and or state and territory public servants about how we prepare for what is really a potentially catastrophic challenge. So I'm here really today to say to you, we want to keep working with you to be as well prepared as we can be for, I think, what is a greater risk than we have faced, any time recently, and to make sure that we are protecting those vulnerable species, that we're also very clear in our messaging to humans, because we know that well-meaning humans will want to look after sick animals that they find in the wild. We really need to be very clear about the best way that we can protect animals and humans and our agriculture industry from this very highly dangerous virus. So, sorry to be the bearer of such alarming news, but I do think it's really important that we are very clear that this is a time that more than ever we need to be working together. So we're very determined as a government to see no new extinctions on our watch, and I wanted to make a couple of announcements today that will help us to achieve that very important objective, announcements that complement the work that you are doing. The Australian Government has just provided $2.8 million to support the people who are working on the front line and are pivotal for recovering species. The recovery of our most imperilled plants and animals is a complex business, and the recovery teams that work to deliver these recovery plans are really at the front line of protecting these species. Recovery teams are collaborative groups of experts and other partners who guide the science, on-ground action and partnerships needed to protect frogs, birds, fish, invertebrates, mammals, reptiles, plants. For example, the Regent Honeyeater Recovery Team and partner organisations work together to restore habitat in key areas of the Regent Honeyeater range and tackle threats like the noisy myna bird. I would like them to come to my house and deal with my noisy myna birds, and supplement the wild population each year with individuals bred in captivity. The recovery team makes sure that actions are science-based and that local land managers and First Nations people are integrated into recovery efforts. 4 organisations have been awarded funding to appoint specialists to coordinate recovery efforts and improve the outcomes of threatened species. That includes the Zoo and Aquarium Association itself, which will receive more than $740,000 to appoint 4 recovery coordinators, including for the brush-tailed rock wallaby. That'll help support the team coordinate recovery planning and provide technical support. This is important to inform the suite of actions that will help the species, including predator control, captive breeding and translocations. The coordinators will also help guide actions for the long-term survival of species like the growling grass frog, central rock rat and others. Today, that $747,000 for the Zoos and Aquarium Association will appoint 4 recovery coordinators for orange-bellied parrot, central rock rat, growling grass frog and bush-tailed rock wallaby, but will also be providing almost $250,000 to the Department of Natural Resources and Environment Tasmania to appoint a recovery action coordinator to support existing recovery teams and help prioritise action for species like the eastern quoll, freshwater crayfish, the red handfish, which is really a very charming fish, and the ammonite snail, and more than $1.6 million to help BirdLife Australia establish recovery teams with dedicated coordinators for the Australasian bittern, the eastern curlew, the hooded plover, and to assist their existing recovery teams, and $200,000 for the Australian Network for Plant Conservation to coordinate efforts to save the critically endangered native guava, angle-stemmed myrtle, scrub turpentine and smooth scrub turpentine that are all threatened by myrtle rust, which, as you know, is incredibly difficult to get a handle on once it's entered into an area where you've got vulnerable species. So that $2.8 million is an illustration of the way that we're spending the $550 million that we've set aside as a government for threatened species and tackling invasive pests. Species recovery will always involve multiple partners working collaboratively and really quite complex interrelations between elements like research, community engagement, on-the-ground interventions, monitoring and conservation actions. Many of our beloved species are battling the impacts of disease, feral pests and the Black Summer bushfires, and that's why adding into the mix immediate threats like avian flu is so concerning. So I just want to finish with a couple of points. Trying to look after threatened species is pointless without being prepared to conserve the habitats that they live in. And we've seen so much pressure on habitats in recent years. One of the next big opportunities we'll have to talk about how we better protect habitat in Australia is with the Global Nature Positive Summit that we're holding here in Sydney in October. We'll be welcoming guests from all around the world. So there'll be other ministers, environment ministers from all over the place, particularly the Pacific and Southeast Asia. We've made a particular effort to get them to come to Australia. There'll be corporate leaders, First Nations people, scientists, environmental organisations, all of them will be attending. And what we're looking for are opportunities for governments, ENGOs and others to create systemic change, to create incentives and frameworks that set us up for ongoing positive change, not kind of one-off approaches. So we'll hear from many different perspectives, in particular Indigenous perspectives and Pacific Island nations. And what we're hoping to do is build on this global momentum coming out of Montreal for investment in nature. Together, we'll demonstrate our government's commitment and show how we will do our share and how we can facilitate others, including the private sector, to do their share to make progress towards the goals of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So I want to finish on a Tasmanian note. Many of you would have seen that 1935 film, Tasmania, the Wonderland, where they show this incredibly sad 21 seconds of footage of the last known Tasmanian tiger. And one of the things, of course, that we're reminded of when we see that footage is how important it is not to let more Australian animals become extinct. Another thing we're reminded of is how very different the zoos of today look to the place, the concrete cell that poor last Tasmanian tiger lived its last days in. And so I want to finish with that, to say that footage can be both a reminder of what it is that we've lost, but perhaps an inspiration and a reminder of just how much has changed in the conservation work you do, and just how much capacity you have to make an incredible difference to the trajectory of nature repair in this country. Thank you.